FinTechTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
I'm your host, Charles Lawton-Jones. Today we're looking at payment technologies. This is a fast-moving sector. We want to know what technologies banks are adopting, who the winners are going to be, and what the objectives are. What are we trying to do with all this new technology? Well, at FinTechTalk, we promise you that we find the greatest experts from around the world to illuminate any issue. And on this time, I believe we've outdone ourselves. We have three genuinely world-class experts in the payment sector. So without further ado, let us meet our experts. We have James Edwards, who is Head of Cards and Payments at BNP Paribas. James, if you could turn your camera on.
Hi.
James, just tell us something about yourself and your career so far.
Okay, so I'm Head of Cards and Payments at BNP Paribas in the UK, so responsible for managing our credit card proposition. So work with engineers on mobile apps, integrating new payment rails, building new reward programs, but I also lead fintech engagement for the business. So I work directly with quite a lot of entrepreneurs and new businesses, so I've got a view both sides of the fence. I also run the accelerator program for BNP Paribas called Serendip.
So you do the lot.
Yes.
Brilliant. You've got a 100% view of everything. Terrific. And let's welcome Hitendra Sachdeva. Now, Hitendra has such a long and wonderful title. I'm going to read out in full. Hitendra is Vice President, Digital Products, Payments, Deposit, Accounts and Liquidity, US Cash Management at RBC. Hitendra, is that correct? Tell us about your role and about your history in the payment sector.
That's correct, Charles, and good evening, everybody. So this is Hitendra. So I'm currently holding a position of Vice President for Digital Products in various domains, so responsible for building new products and innovation for accounts, liquidity, deposit solutions, as well as the payments. In my past roles, I have delivered a lot of innovative solutions in different geographies, be in India, in Canada, or in Middle East. Worked on variety of digital wallet, virtual cards, payments, gateways, payments, products, and launched even robots in the branch banking. So that's the kind of fintech side of connection I bring and how this partnership with the banks can help. So I will, bring some sort of a thought process there.
Fantastic. So really deep technical knowledge. That's just what we need. Fantastic. And our third panelist is Lee McNabb, who is Payments Strategic Insights Lead at NatWest. Lee, do we have you? We may be experiencing a glitch with Lee. So we'll introduce him in a minute. Hitendra, let's just start off with the premise of this show, because the fintechs sometimes like to frame this as fintechs versus banks. That's their selling point. That's how they're getting investment, because they claim they can put one over on the incumbents. Not everyone sees it that way. From the institutional perspective, how do you see it? Is this fintechs versus banks, or is there close collaboration here?
I think if I go back a few years, 5-10 years back, then it was really a fintech versus bank, where the fintechs were coming as a threat to the traditional banking model. But now, if you look at the way technology is progressing, there's a close collaboration and partnership which is developing, and the ecosystem which is coming in such a way where both of them, the traditional bank and the fintech ecosystem, is complementing each other. Now fintech is bringing up with the innovative idea wherein the traditional bank has the customer base and the security infrastructure to protect some of the information which flows around it. This fintech needs some funding. Banks have the funding, so their partnership can go very well together, and I think that's how it has evolved over a period of time, being a threat to a banking model versus being a partner with the banking model, where they come with an idea, banking channel supports them, the banking industry supports them, funds them, and by their idea builds on top of that and creates a partnership which is I would say a mutual win from a fintech perspective, from a bank's perspective, and from an end user perspective.
Fantastic. James, you seem to be nodding away there. You agree?
Yeah, I think that sometimes that's definitely the case, but I think every fintech is different, and sometimes entity for a bank, and sometimes they may end up competing. FinTech may start being a collaborative, or vice versa. Sometimes they may start with an intent to compete, and sometimes they may end up collaborating, and sometimes they can be the two at the same time.
Fantastic. Lee, it's great to have you with us. Perhaps we could just include you, Lee. Just perhaps introduce yourself and give us a clue as to your work history, how you worked in the payments sector. Oh, pardon? No. Technical glitch. We're not hearing Lee, so we'll plumb him in a minute. Okay, let's deal with the payment technologies themselves. Now, this is such a complicated sphere, and I find myself sometimes worried at my lack of education because I see technologies emerging from around the world and thinking, gosh, I'm struggling to keep up. I can't imagine how difficult it must be working for an institution, James and Hitenda, trying to keep up with everything. So just tell us from your perspective, what are the most interesting new payment technologies you're currently dealing with? James, if you could go.
Cool. So, I mean, in the past, it wasn't that fast moving. So I come from the world where we were talking about backs and chaps and all that kind of stuff. But it has moved on quite quickly, probably since the mid kind of 2010s. It's just kind of really accelerated. So it used to be that contactless used to be quite modern, but now the kind of things that we're looking at in the immediate now are open banking payments and how that's got the potential to transform account to account payments. So that's the one, but it's not just that payment rail that's interesting. It's how you initiate the payment. Do you use QR codes in stores? Is a one that we're trying to solve in a business context at the moment. How does someone initiate a account to account transfer, maybe to a merchant within that kind of store environment? And a lot of it is keeping in touch with what's going on in the wider market. So
just elaborate.
Yeah.
Can you just elaborate on the QR code? Because I must confess, it's not something I personally have used. How widespread is it? Is it coming from some part of the world where this has been perfected, the QR code payment system?
So it's interesting. So I mean, it's initially came from Far East. However, every kind of market is different, especially when you come to retail payments. So wholesale is quite global, but retail is quite local. So we've got our own local context in the UK that we've got to generate a fit for. So the classic QR code payments is the Chinese super apps, but there aren't many apps in China, whereas there are thousands of apps in the UK. So you've got to enable QR code payments across different merchants, different platforms, different banks. So it's quite complicated. But I guess the transformative factor for QR code payments is the fact that they're mobile initiated. So most people, 90% of people have got a mobile in the UK. Our customer segment that we cater for, penetration is more like 98, 99%. So customers being able to initiate a payment by scanning their phone is ideal. So generating and the QR code is obviously you need internet reception, but it is fast. But it's just building that kind of user experience to create a secure environment for customers to be able to transact in that way is quite tricky. And also, merchant point of sale systems can be quite slow, and there are quite a lot of different point of sale systems. So generating a user experience that's quite reassuring for a customer and quite standardized is quite tricky when you've got lots of different systems at play.
Hitenda, talk us through some of the technologies that you're dealing with.
Yeah, so these days what we are seeing is a trend which is emerging as standardizing payments flow, payments messaging, and utilizing a lot more ISO standards. So if you look at over 30 countries are right now working on the instant payment or real-time payments in one shape or the other. And they all are adopting the ISO 20000 series of a message standard, which enables some sort of an interoperability as well if these countries plan to decide later on. So I think that's where I would say a lot of focus is happening. The beauty of these ISO messages, as James was saying, that every retail oriented payments are different based on the demographic, based on that particular country or land. based on their rules and the kind of environment and the setup they may have. However, when it comes down to the corporate commercial payments on a global front, an interoperable model works very well. Like we used to see Swift international messaging earlier. So now that is being replaced or overtaken by these ISO standards. Even Swift is implementing some of these ISO standards. That's the kind of trend we are seeing and the new technology which is adopting it very quickly and very fast.
Okay. Can I just ask you about the objectives? What is motivating this? I mean, consumers, I'm not going to accept the argument there's consumer demand. Consumers kind of use whatever they're familiar and given, and past have accepted all sorts of unpleasant and awkward payment systems. Chaps taking 3 days to clear is convenient for nobody. So is this cost? Is it reliability? Is it anti-fraud? James, when you think about new payment technologies, what's motivating your organization in investing so much in new payment concepts?
Cool. And it's not just banks who are looking at transforming the way payments work. There's lots of different parties at play. So um, you've got to look at it in the context of what's happening in the payment space. So you're seeing a drive away from cash. So cash was a competitive payment. It's now being eroded to such a level now where it needs help to remain economic. So what you've got is card-based payments are now pretty much 80% of spontaneous payments. So that provides regulators an issue. They think maybe there's a bit too much dominance from the major card schemes. So maybe they want to introduce competitors into the market. So and then also that feeds on to merchants. So merchants currently pay fees to acquiring banks and to schemes and issuers. So they've got an incentive to reduce cost and also improve convenience to somewhat. Although card payments are incredibly convenient, I would say. I work for a credit card business, but yeah, they are incredibly convenient. But there's opportunity to improve cost there. But there's also security aspects. So although I talked about open banking payments, although that's incredibly quick, those kind of consumer protections aren't in place necessarily to the level that you'd get with card payments. So there's like different combinations of characteristics that each payment method has that at certain points and to certain parties may be beneficial.
Fantastic. And Hitender, what's driving the investment in new technologies with you? Because as James says, there are actually lots of potential motivations here. I mean, just talk us through maybe cost and the opportunity to strip out some of those, it can be 3 to 5% that's gobbled up in fees, which is painfully high, really. So talk about the kind of hierarchy of motivation. Is this all about stripping out cost, or are there other motivations?
I think it's a mix of few things. So cost is definitely a factor. If I particularly talk about Canada, so in Canada, so the cost to process overall payments, whether it's through card or through checks or through any other means, is $4 to $5 billion in a year, which is a huge cost. Think about a corporate commercial or a small business incurring that much of a money just to get their payments processed. It's a huge dent on their liquidity as well. So if they are getting $100 bill to be paid by their customer, so they only get $95 in their account. So they pay $5 out of their own pocket to get that payment processed through these card processing schemes or different payment gateways. So the way technology is changing, so there are a few things. One, as James highlighted, the customer convenience. Then bringing the frictionless technology in play. And another thing is the millennial and the Gen Z who's coming up with lot of tech savvy gadgets, and they want their everything to be connected with those technology instruments like their handphones and all their voice enabled devices. They just want to do everything with the click of a command. Now these days, if you see, one click payments are taking a shape. The QR code payment, as James highlighted, are taking a shape. So in one way, these are increasing convenience. These are also eliminating some of the traditional infrastructure, which used to have a lot of burden to maintain them, and that's where the cost was very heavy. Now, since these are all cloud-enabled solutions, which eliminate lots of cost to maintain this infrastructure, and that cost is being passed on to some of these vendor merchant and to the end user, and everybody is being benefited. So say like if I talk about the QR code enabled pause system. So the moment I scan a QR code, my account is being debited or the money is being taken from my card and immediately being credited to the merchant's account with low cost and maybe a fraction of some cents or some dollars, not or 3% or 5% the way they charge for the card processing fees. So I think these are some of the critical factors to consider. And of course, the COVID was a greater contributor to have such innovation coming in. When we were living in the pre-COVID world, we were still very comfortable carrying cash. We were still very comfortable issuing checks. But the day we saw the world is coming to a shutdown, we figured out a different way to deal with it, because when there is nobody to sign a check, how the payment needs to be made to a vendor or a supplier. Now, when we see the currency is exchanging hands, we are in a threat of some contamination. So how do we deal with it? How we can enable electronic payments? How we innovate some sort of a payment instruments that can help our uh, customers as well as the merchant, supplier, banks, and whatnot. You can think of payment is a complex world, but it gets tagged and attached with anything and everything you do in today's world. So
Yeah.
that's how I see it is changing the dynamics.
Perhaps it reflects my mindset, but who are the losers going to be? I'm looking at Visa and MasterCard, which have wonderful infrastructures, but goodness, they make a lot of money. I'm thinking maybe the Swift network that's been around for years. I'm looking at Chaps. I mean, can we please eliminate Chaps? James, who are we going to bump off in this race for better technology?
So I guess you got to look at the technology that's coming along. I think the thing that's going to bump Chaps is potentially, well, I mean, it's going to be difficult because it's such high value. Not even digital currency, central bank digital currency is going to kind of kick that, because we're talking about £10,000, £20,000 limits. So you're not likely to get that cleared, buy your house through that. So I think it's going to be to stay that kind of high value kind of payment. I mean, faster payment limits, they're not that kind of level. So yeah, it's difficult. But I guess it kind of boils down, if there are no losers, and it's difficult to find losers, it's going to become very complicated for customers to understand how they're supposed to pay. So if they are presented with a credit card bill and given 6 or 7 different options on how to pay, do they want to pay direct debit, do they want to pay in, through the merchant, or faster payments, or instant bank transfer via open banking, it's going to become quite complicated. So I guess it's the role for us guys in banks to simplify that for customers and just identify the best options for customers to be able to make payments. And that may be looking at what device the customer's paying from. So if they're paying on a mobile, open banking payments are going to be quite convenient. But if they're face-to-face or over a laptop, it's going to be more kind of bank transfers. So maybe it's up to us guys at the banks to determine what's presented to those users. I think direct debit and standing orders are looking quite vulnerable from a recurring payment, especially if we have more changes to open banking recurring payment to enable those to kind of persist for a bit longer than 90 days. So they're probably the ones I'd say are looking a bit more vulnerable than the rest.
Okay, fantastic. Hitender, you're dealing with North America, with Canada. Which payment technologies do you think are going to suffer? I mean, if we're taking cost out of the equation, and you say, at the moment it can be possible for 5% of what customer pays to be lost in fees, it's your objective to try and reduce that as much as possible. I mean, that's a serious financial hit to the whole ecosystem if you're reducing that 5 to, 1 to 2.5%. So there are losers in this, are there not?
I would say yes, there are some losers, but whenever we are sunsetting some sort of a technology, then there is a emerging trend of a new piece of a technology which enables a new way of commercializing things and generating more revenue. Now, if you think about or you see the data trends or the overall statistics, if you go a few years back, the electronic payments were hardly contributing, on the overall payment space. It was all paper based and traditional way of dealing with and settling the payments and all. Now if you look at electronic payments are on the rise. So as the card usage is going to decline, your touchless, contactless and frictionless QR code based payments will get enabled as the volume builds up. And even though your cost is negligible or lower, you still are able to make and maintain that much of a revenue and profitability out of it. So that's the trend which is emerging. And then there are a lot of variety of different instruments are coming, which can become a business model and revenue generating model for these companies, like a digital wallet, CBDC, and cryptos and whatnot. So everything will be then priced in a different way. There are different pricing model which will evolve and come in play. So right now, since things are evolving, fintechs and banks are experimenting, so there are freemiums which are available. The moment these become a little mature instrument, you will see starting being charged. So some fintechs, some banks will start charging the customer. I don't know how that model is going to work, but that's the emerging trend you will see. Of course, these big card companies, they had the monopolize or duopolize system for quite a long. Now they have a threat now coming from the fintechs and the way new technology is being implemented. So they have to adopt, and I think they are adopting it. They are innovating in certain ways, and they are not really keeping the traditional way. Otherwise, they are going to die like Nokia. The, what happened, the Nokia kind of giant when the smartphones have come, right? So I'm sure that these companies are smart enough, and they were well ahead in the games when they introduced these card technologies and the platform. And I'm sure they are going to be ahead now as well, while introducing and implementing new piece of technology to support their cards with a low cost mechanism.
Fantastic. Lee, we are delighted to see you. Are you coming through loud and clear?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Yes.
Little tinny, but no, it's
Wow.
Great. Lee, we're going to plunge you into the middle of this discussion. I'm interested in what technologies you guys are working with, because the global payments landscape is so complicated. I can imagine some of our audience thinking, God, they know what happens in their own country or in their own territories, but it is a complicated world out there. So give us some insights. What happens at NatWest? What are you looking into? We've heard about QR codes, about open banking. There are all sorts of weird, wonderful systems, but what are you working on?
Yeah, so NatWest is kind of broad and varied, and I'll start from the top because I didn't really give the intro. So I look after strategy and research for NatWest Group. NatWest Group is made up of a kind of group of brands, whether it be Coutts on a private end, right through to NatWest Markets and RBSI. So we have a UK focus, but a bit of a global presence, if you like. Payments wise in the UK, we do about 1 in 4 payments. That's about 60 trillion in value across a year. That's everything from cards to faster payments, backs, chaps, etc. So we kind of touch everything. So it means our technology is kind of intertwined everywhere across the organization. Payments flows everywhere across the organization, and we are systemically important to the UK. That brings its challenges as well. We have a significant consumer base in the retail bank, and we are the largest business and corporate banker in the UK. So a lot of the time, Charles, when we're trying to do new innovation or new technology, we'll be creating something for our commercial lens, whether it's for our acquirer till, or whether it be for our open banking proprietary asset in Payit. It actually disrupts ourselves. So we have an internal debate and challenge quite frequently where, well, why would you impact our card revenue and card interchange in the retail side for benefit in the commercial side? So it's actually quite a good kind of proof point and test bed, if you like, because if we're disrupting ourselves, but there's a positive outcome, then actually we're doing something right at the market level. So that's kind of intro. In terms of the biggest levels of disruption, there's quite a few, to be fair. I'll probably call out a couple where we've focused most recently. We like to see ourselves as a bit of a leader in the open banking space. So we have a proprietary PISP. So for those that don't know, a payment initiation service provider. So we offer to merchants, to the market, the ability to create and send and request payments through account to account and through open banking. So we went over and above the regulatory mandate. We've also done the same with the VRP, so the variable recurring payments mandate, and we offer a non-sweeping commercial VRP. I know we're here to talk about fintech, so we've signed commercial deals with some of the biggest and smallest competitive PISPs at the same time to try and spread the word and get that proposition out to market. And we're talking to some big merchants at the moment in terms of how that could potentially work. In the acquiring space, we've also done tap to pay, most recently on Android, and we were the first large bank to do it with Apple as well. So we kind of see this world evolving where actually the device is really important. And forgive me if you've been speaking about this, the ability to use that device to move money more seamlessly, whether it be to send or to accept. I did hear James talking about QR codes before my tech failed me. So we do utilize QR codes as well in our peer-to-peer payments. So what we've done is we've put Pay It as a proprietary asset into our retail app. So you can make peer-to-peer payments. You can do that using a request or a link, but you can do that using a QR code as well. So that's arguably a way into tap to pay as well, but on a non-card rail.
Lee, do you reckon QR is just like an intermittent step between tap to pay, retail, consumer to consumer? Or what do you reckon? Do you reckon it'll just be mobile?
That's a good question, James. I think it's an interesting one. QR is not really evolved in the UK for payments. I think COVID introduced it more in general acceptance, whether it's ordering at a table in a restaurant or in a bar, etc. We've all done that. You pull up the menu using the QR code because they didn't want people going to the till, didn't have servers coming around to your table. I think QR in the UK for payments probably has some way to go in terms of mass adoption. We're so heavily wedded to NFC and to the ability to tap. It'll be interesting to see how we take that further from a QR perspective. I think personally that the tap to pay, when I say tap to pay, it's the ability to use your Android or your Apple device that we hold in our hands now as the ability to accept. I think that's potentially quite game changing. I still think there's a place for terminals, and I still think there's a place for card usage for larger transactions. But we see a real need within our kind of micro enterprise and micro business space for the ability to use what we already have, right? Everyone has it, to be able to take a payment directly, whether it's the barbers, the window cleaners, the cleaners, whatever it might be. They don't want another device. They don't want the complexity that brings. They just want their bank to give them something that can allow them to take payments seamlessly and easily. We all know that changing habit in payments is actually quite hard. And there will, I think, be an ingrained kind of concern. Wait a minute, why is this person giving me their phone? They almost might trust this external device a bit more than someone's phone. But I think that's a relatively small hurdle. It's one we saw with contactless to begin with. As people understand that the seamlessness and simplicity that it brings, I think you'll start to see more of an adoption.
Right. So if I would like to add a little bit on top that, I think India has implemented this QR code enabled payments very well. So they integrated the street vendors to this ecosystem, where if I put some statistics here. So we did a study with that when we were implementing this digital payment in India. So these street vendors, how it works is it was purely a cash economy, cash-based payments. You go and buy something on the street vendor and you pay them in cash. When we ran a study, we surveyed and we interviewed a few of the street vendors, like in thousands, and every street vendor, so the 90% of the street vendors said that if they're selling for a particular product, say $1.10, so the majority of customers will pay them only $1. They will not pay them 10 cents. So they were losing on the other hand, because the cash, nobody carries that change along with them. So they will always round up and give them lump sum amount. Now, since this digital payment came in play, the QR code system was integrated. Now, every street vendor there carries that QR code sticker on their cart. So you can just scan and pay. So now what they are saying is they're getting full money of their product. So they're not losing those 10 or 15 or 5 cents kind of a money. So that was a big chunk at the end of the day for them. Now they are earning that back. So that was really a great, I would say, a problem to solve for these poor street vendors. And another thing which happened is that They used to carry a lot of cash, and sometimes they lose that cash as well due to weather condition, in rain and something. So the cash gets spoiled or destroyed. Now, since everything is digital, the money straight away goes into their bank account, and they can use that money. They earn interest on it. And there's another merchant lending program which government supported, and the banks also came, and fintech also evolved around it. They started lending money to these street vendors, which was never the case before. The street vendor never had the access to these lending programs. Now, since everything flowing through a digital ecosystem, banks and fintechs are seeing that they are receiving money on a day in and day out basis. So they can create a risk profile of those vendors and give them some sort of a limit or a line of credit. Hey, you're receiving $1,000 receipts every day. I can lend you $600 every single time, right? Without any security or collateral. So that's the kind of emerging solution or new way of building a combined ecosystem which is coming, and open banking is enabling all of that seamlessly.
Gosh, it's such a good perspective, Tendo, when you put it in the perspective of people like street vendors who really do benefit. I mean, sometimes people have a, let's say, cynical view of banking, or some people do, but it does show these technologies have such an impact on real businesses and on real people. It's fantastic. Now, something we've touched on, and I hope this isn't too much of a distraction, are these central bank digital currencies. This is moving fast, and there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of libertarian worries about these digital currencies. I'm just wondering whether you guys are yet taking central bank digital currencies seriously. Who'd like to talk about this? I mean, you guys, Lee, you're nodding away a little bit there. Is this on your radar yet?
Oh, yeah, I'm nodding away because it's a big part of my role, to be fair.
Okay.
I've been looking at digital currencies and CBDC specifically for the past 2-3 years. I smile kind of indignantly, if you like, with the complexity and challenge of them, especially in the UK. It is very much on our radar. We are an incumbent bank in the UK. The discussions from a UK perspective talk about a fairly high level of depository limit that would sit in a CBDC, and that would sit on the ledger of the central bank as opposed to the incumbent bank. So as you can imagine, that challenges our current funding and business model. I think the Bank of England recognises that. The digital euro, very interestingly, has a much lower limit proposed in its initial thinking. So it's very much front and centre of our thinking, right from a treasury perspective all the way through to, as the UK are looking at retail use cases, and we've just discussed a few using different rails, we do kind of look at it and think, well, what are the obvious use cases that exist in the CBDC world that don't already exist in a fairly advanced digital payment world, whether it be the UK, whether it be India. So yeah, we are at the forefront of the debate, shall we say, utilising UK finance. We've done a bilateral response to the consultation, and we are keen to work proactively with the Bank of England in that kind of private-public partnership that they so encourage.
Good. Well, I can imagine you have a sort of a hotline through to the Bank of England, because I know you use that term systemically important, which, as we know, is not just a sort of meaningless catchphrase. It means that if something serious happens at NatWest, the cabinet need to know, because if you guys have a wobble, that the whole country or the whole world economy suffers the ripple
I wouldn't
effect.
quite call it a bat phone, but yeah, we probably do have a line into them. Yeah.
What's the mood at the Bank of England? I mean, this is such a big break with the past. It's so politically explosive. Central bank digital currencies. What's the mood?
I think
at the political
element is the political element is interesting. You would have seen Andrew Bailey's speech on Monday. You've got John Cunliffe, who I think is quite a big advocate, although John Cunliffe is soon to leave the Bank of England. There was a push from Rishi Sunak to be almost a kind of global hub. Whether that wanes or not will be interesting. I mentioned the digital euro because I think politically there will be a closer than we think link between the UK and the Eurozone, though the ECB is facing some significant challenge from the member states in terms of what a digital euro might look like. I think if you think about the drivers behind the CBDC from the Bank of England, there's two primarily. One is the cash anchor piece. And as cash reduces in usage and circulation, how do the Bank of England retain their role? And the second is innovation. But our read is that they are very much focused on the cash angle and the singleness of money. So the ability to move money at par value. Whether the CBDC is the answer to that is the other question that the industry needs to get their heads around.
Fantastic. James, what's going on? BNP Paribas. I mean, what sort of timeline are you looking at? If you do have anything, I mean, do we know when the launch dates might be of these digital currencies?
It'll be later this decade, but it's interesting. So we're quite heavily involved in the Euro side, and the difference between kind of like the attitude of the regulators is quite different. So it's a lot more inclusive of the banks, and that we're talking about setting up around digital wallets and stuff like that, as part of the exercise. Whereas in the UK, it seems to be a bit more kind of like hands off from the regulator. They want to be less intrusive and give innovation and companies and private sector a bit more of a hand in how that money moves. Because at the moment, we're just talking about essentially having an account that sits, as Lee said, just a ledger. But it's how that money moves, and is it going to move in a different way to how money moves currently, or is it going to be sat on a Apple Pay or Google Pay wallet, or is there going to be something new to enable that funds to move? Not sure. I hope. So a lot of the open banking stuff, we saw a lot of fintech activity and growth in new entrants and new startups. It'd be nice to see that come out as a result of the introduction of CBDC, and that we get new companies coming in offering those facilities to enable the account creation and disbursement of the money. So that'd be nice to see, and there'll be lots of different business models potentially as a result of that. So I'm hoping that's how that looks. That we'll have banks like these and mine introducing our own capability for customers to deposit, but also we'll have lots of new entrants coming in with different ways of monetizing that business model. That'd be a nice thing to see.
Definitely. I've just been very nosy.
And that's a good point that James. Sorry, Charles.
No, go ahead.
That's a good point that James makes. Ultimately, if my kind of summary came over quite negative, there as a bank that has 15, 16 million retail consumers, we're going to want to be at the forefront of that consumer interface. The Bank of England calls it a PIP, payment. Want to be a wallet of choice. Why would you not want to be? But also there's going to be fintechs that want to be that, and let's be candid about it, there are going to be big techs that want to be that. If I'm sat in looking at the CBDCs with great interest, to be fair.
Okay, your sound's coming and going a little bit for me, Lee, but just for our viewers and listeners, if you'd like to ask a question and you're on the platform, you're very welcome to do so. We've got about 8 minutes left, I think. But I'm just curious as to where you guys get your inspiration from, because payments is now a global industry. It must be exhausting trying to keep up with everything. I mean, Hitenda, if you want to offer some advice to our viewers and our listeners, where in the world should they be looking? I mean, India always has all sorts of cutting edge technologies. Where do you recommend people look around the world for emerging payment technologies? They're going to be significant.
Right. I think there's a shift in the trend. Earlier, we always used to look at the West for technology. Now the things have changed, and suddenly, if you look at the eastern side of it, and especially the Far East, the Asian side of it, like Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, and India now, they have emerged as a leader. Even China, if you look at. So from a payments perspective, from a digital banking and technology perspective, they have implemented the innovative ideas which we can't even think of doing it in the Western side of the world. Earlier, we always looked at the West that, okay, West is doing that, let's follow that. But now it's the reverse model. Look at the digital payment model which India has enabled. They have enabled a mobile payment without even having a smartphone. You can still use your traditional, analog kind of a device, and you can still make a digital payment by using some SMS-based banking. They have connected every single individual in the country with the banking ecosystem and the digital ecosystem based on their own individual choices, that how they would like to receive a payment, how they like to make a payment. And I think that's a fundamental change, and that's a significant improvement from an infrastructure point of view, that where everybody used to think like a country like India, rural, with full of a lot of challenges with demographics and all, how they are going to enable the internet and all. Today, world's largest smartphone using population is in India. Today's world's largest, youngest population is in India. And I think they are changing this demographic. They are changing these trends. And that is where, see these fintech models and even the other innovations are evolving from there, and the world is now started following. Look at the way they have handled the COVID crisis. They distributed vaccine in a record manner. Vaccinating 140, I would say 1.4 billion people was not an easy task, but they did it.
Yeah.
And they used digital technology to do that. Let's talk about that. I mean, yes, we do talk about the innovation in the fintech side, but how they have utilized their digital ecosystem, which they created in the country, where every single individual is connected with that, to use that system to distribute vaccine and make sure that every single citizen of the country, resident of the country, get vaccinated, and record is being created. So this is how, I think the technology is evolving in all the different sectors and different industries and different sites. So everywhere there's a use case, there's a problem to solve. Earlier there was a think tank machinery who would come together, put a white paper out, and then people will come up with some sort of a solution. These days, every problem is being solved by some sort of a digital technology, and any organization or any set of people who are solving it, they become either a fintech or a tech-driven company or a startup.
Cool. I love that perspective that India is leading. And I can tell you in the UK, when it comes to vaccine records, the UK does not have even a unified NHS database. Our 4 different nations each have their own unique health identifier, and the data cannot be shared between them. So we couldn't even keep track of who'd been vaccinated twice. So trust me, there's plenty of humility here in the UK. We know we need to look at other countries. Hence the question, really. James, I love asking people to pass on their advice. So when it comes to educating ourselves about payments, where do you look? Is there a part of the world you think, your colleagues say, have a look at what's happening over there, have a look at these particular technologies? What advice can you pass on for our viewers who want to improve their knowledge of the payment system?
Cool. So you only got 2 eyes. So the best thing you can do if you work for a bank, so the agenda that we've got is, can banks match fintech? Is if you've got 1,000 people working for your bank, or 10,000 or 100,000, is get them looking. So you've got to embed a culture of innovation. So you've got to encourage people, your colleagues, to be inspired to look around and to look at industry press, speak to people within the industry, gain connections across their colleagues and outside of the organisation, and try and create that kind of network effect in order to do that. So that's what I try and do. And that's how you get real success as a business. But obviously there's a lot of connections. So attend every event that you can possibly attend, speak to everyone, be gregarious, be outgoing. You see someone, queuing up for the coffee or whatever, and they're just doing it on their own. You go and talk to them and find out who they are. So that's essentially the best way of doing it.
Love it. Good advice in any industry, I think. Lee, if I could just ask that question for you, when you're talking with your colleagues, is there some part of the world you've repeatedly found yourself coming back to and referring to?
Yeah, well, it's hard to go last when you're answering these questions, because I like it to look upon India actually and think they're doing a lot of good things. And I think digital ID is a big thing that differentiates that market from the UK. And like James said, for me, it's about the network, right? I've just been to the States and I came back, and on being a bit of a payments geek, I was fascinated wherever I went. How could I pay? What was the journey like? What could I use? Will it all be cash? Will it not? And so I've created quite a network on the likes of LinkedIn, where actually you create that network to prompt and probe and get views from others. Payments has this odd kind of cottage industry of events and conferences that go on throughout the year. There's lots of webinars like this one, which I'm sure have been great whilst I've not been on. So there's plenty of ways to engage and understand and probe and prompt and just kind of absorb as much information as possible. And the way we are now in a virtual world, obviously when your technology works, you can do that in quite a consumable way.
Fantastic. Well, guys, we've exhausted a lot of different subjects here. Thank you so much for your expertise. And I hope that if any of our viewers do see you guys at a conference, they'll feel free to go up and just tap you on the shoulder and say, yep, saw you on FinTech Talk, and exchange details. Because you're quite right. This the payment industry is, as you say, it's an interesting world. And I really hope people do exchange information and feel comfortable with communicating and making contacts and swapping ideas, because it's just moving so fast. There's no other way to keep up. So thank you so much. That's this episode for FinTech Talk. We're back in September. We'll be talking about the balance between innovation and compliance. We'll provide more details near the time. But from myself, from Lee, from Hitender and James, thank you so much for your presence. And we'll see you in September. Thank you and goodbye.